Hi, it's Carolyn. I'm here to help you learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate this cake. She doesn't even go here. Who doesn't love Mean Girls? So I'm doing this burn book cake. And I'm starting with my cake already baked, but I'm going to show you how to fill it, frost it, and decorate it. And this is just a quick voiceover tutorial. I do have a video where I go into full detail on how I do a book cake, and I'm going to link that in the description. And just a reminder, any of the tools that I use in all of the videos that I reference will be linked below. And I'm also going to let you know how much I charged for this cake. So let's get started. So this is a quarter sheet cake. I baked it the other day and I froze it, and then I thawed it the morning of, and now I am just leveling off the top with a serrated knife. And then I have a bottle of simple syrup here, and I'm just spraying a little simple syrup on there. I have a video showing you how I make the simple syrup. I will link that below. I cut it in half, and I'm getting a little bit of icing down on the cake board. And I started with it on an angle, and I just have some American buttercream, and I am filling the cake with the American buttercream and just placing the other piece on top, making sure that it's even. And then I'm taking some more icing and just patching the seams just so everything is sealed before I wrap it up. So once that's done, I'm just going to take a piece of clean plastic and wrap this up and make sure that it is covering the entire cake all the way at the bottom, and then I can set that aside for a couple hours to settle. And now I'm going to put on a crumb coat. So the crumb coat is just a very thin layer of icing, and I'm starting at the bottom, then I'm letting it come over the top of the cake, and I filled in the top. I'm dipping my bench scraper in a hot pot of water, take a paper towel and wipe that off. So I just have a hot blade and it's not wet, and I'm just removing the excess icing and taking my spatula and pressing the excess icing back. It doesn't have to be nice and neat because it's a crumb coat. Let's put that in the refrigerator for about 5 hours so the icing can get really hard. Now the icing is hard. I took it out of the fridge, and I'm going to put on the final coat of icing. So I am doing about a 1/2 inch thick coat, and I'm starting at the very bottom, and then I make sure it comes over the top of the cake and I fill in the top. Now I do have a video where I go into detail on how I make a book cake, and that will be linked in the description. I dip that bench scraper in that hot pot of water, and I always want to remove the excess water with my paper towel, and then I'm holding it straight and just removing this excess icing and trying to smooth it out the best that I can. So I do a couple different things. I hold it one way like I did before, and then I'm holding it this way and I'm pushing it back on the side. And again, I go into detail on how I do this in that other video. And then I have a Viva paper towel, and I'm just using my fingers and gently smoothing out any of the marks that bench scraper made, just starting the smoothing process. Now this is going to be covered in fondant, so it doesn't have to be perfect, luckily, but now I'm taking a fondant smoother and just pressing that paper towel. See how I kind of wrap it around the corner, and I do one side and then the other side, just really pressing that icing onto the cake. And now I'm taking my spatula again, and I'm just trying to keep it level and pressing back that icing to make sure that I have a clean line. And I'm lining up the back half of that spatula with the line I previously made just to make sure that it is completely level. Then I like to take my paper towel one more time and just really press that icing against the cake to try to get it in the right shape. And I'm going to refine it later, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but just wanted to do this one more time. And then I'm going to take my spatula again and just kind of refine that top edge just to make sure that it is perfectly straight. So I'm sitting eye level with the cake. That way I can make sure that it is even. And I'm getting a little bit of water on that spatula and dropping it on the top of the cake and spreading it around. That hot water is really going to smooth out that icing on the top. And then I'm just pushing it in from the sides into the middle just to make sure everything's nice and smooth. And that looks beautiful. I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now, that was in the refrigerator for overnight, so it was like over 12 hours. I have this L square, and I want to make these corners perfectly 90 degrees. So I'm lining it up very close to the edge, and I made the mark with a knife, and then I'm cutting straight down. And now that icing is hard and cold. I just got it out of the refrigerator, so I can really shape this cake into a nice, perfect rectangle. Then I'm lining that bottom part with that line I just cut, and the side part, I'm going to just trim off that excess icing just to make sure that it is perfectly square. So I'm just making the marks first. So I'm lining that bottom part up with the line I just made, and then I'm just marking on the side where I need to cut off the excess. And once I have all of those lines marked, I'm just taking my knife and cutting it down, straight down, vertical, so everything is nice and crisp and clean. And you want to do this process when the cake is cold so you don't mess it up. I have a wet paper towel and I'm cleaning off the board. And I just want to measure before I put it in the fridge, measure the three sides, the two short ones and the long one. That's where the pages are going to go and how tall it is. You'll see what I mean, but I need to know how long I need to roll out this fondant, and I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now, all of my fondant has this gum tex powder, Tylose powder, CMC powder. It's all basically the same thing. You sprinkle a little bit into your fondant. I only work with marshmallow fondant. Knead it in there, roll it out, let it sit, and it's going to dry harder and be so much easier to work with. I will link this in the description for you. So I rolled this white fondant out really long, and I want to measure and make sure that it's long enough. And then I have my fondant smoother, and I'm just smoothing out any air bubbles that are in the fondant. I'm taking my pizza cutter and just cutting a straight edge on the bottom, and then it had to be like 3 3/4 inches tall, so I'm holding the 3 3/4 down at that straight line and making a dotted line with my pizza cutter, and then connecting those lines so it is as tall as it needs to be. And then I'm just going to straighten that with my rulers. And I have some piping gel here, so I want to get piping gel on the two shorter edges and one long edge of the book because that's where the pages are going to go. And then I like to thin it out with a little bit of water, so I dip that paintbrush in some water and thin out that piping gel a little bit. And then I want to roll that up from one end to the other, making sure the bottom is aligned. And I'm starting on one side and just rolling this around the cake, really pressing it against there, making sure no air bubbles form behind it, and taking my scissors and just trimming off the excess. And now I just need to take my fondant smoothers and really press this down onto the cake and smooth it out. And I'm taking my thumbs and just pinching in the corners just to get a little bit of a sharper edge. You don't want to pinch too hard. You don't want to put your fingerprints in it. And I'm just kind of just trying to get a sharper edge on the fondant and then smoothing that out with my fondant smoother. And now I have this little rolling wheel and I'm making the page lines in it. So I'm just dragging it along all three sides of this fondant just to make it look like the pages of a book. And that looks really good. Before I put that back in the fridge, I just want to fill in that void on the top. So I'm just getting a little bit more American buttercream icing and filling it in so the icing comes to the top of the fondant. That way the book cover won't sink down into the cake. You want to make sure that it is nice and even. So I'm just taking my spatula and carefully filling in all of the gaps and just removing any excess icing. And that looks much better. I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator for a few hours so it can solidify. Then I took it out again. And now I want to measure for the cover. So I start down on one side with the ruler, and I want it to hang off about a 1/2 inch on each side. So I'm just making sure that I measure the whole thing, and then I'm going to roll this pink fondant out in a big square. So this fondant does have that gum tex powder mixed into it. It's going to dry really hard and hold its shape. I'm going to use my fondant smoother and smooth it out. And then I'm going to cut a straight edge and use my L square like I did earlier. Line that bottom part on that straight edge I just cut and then cut along the side so I get perfect. Now I'm taking my ruler and just doing the dotted line technique that I did before. So one side I needed it like 10 3/4 inches. So I'm holding that down at the straight edge, and the other side, I think it was 10 inches. So I'm holding that down on the straight line that I created and making my dotted line. And then I just want to connect those dots that I made. So I'm lining the left side up with the straight edge and cutting this to the correct size. Now I want to bring it over to the cake. So I'm just aligning it down on the one side and letting it droop over the side. So I need to get this in the right position, and I'm just using my fondant smoother and using my fingers, making sure that it is hanging over the edge about 1/4 to a 1/2 inch. That way I can trim it to size. Using my fingers to pinch a little sharper edge here, and my fondant smoothers and my hands to smooth it out. So now I'm taking my rulers and I'm pressing in the sides. This way I can get more perfect angles on the cake. And it's my weird technique. I do show it in my video on how I make a book cake, and that will be linked below. And now I'm holding my ruler up and I just want to trim the excess off. And I'm holding it, making sure I'm not moving the ruler. I'm just creating a line with that needle tool and then taking my scissors and carefully trimming off the excess. You want to align your scissors up so you don't get jagged cuts. You want perfectly clean cuts. And just smooth that out with my fingers. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm holding that up and just taking my needle tool and creating a line wherever there's any excess fondant. So I want it, it's about 1/4 of an inch, I would say, that it's hanging over the edge. And I just want to make sure that it is nice and perfectly even. Now I have some wax paper here. I'm going to fold it in half again, and in half again, and then I'm just going to cut it, and I don't want those corners to droop, so I'm sticking them underneath each of these corners until they dry, so they dry flat. And now I need to make the bottom cover, so I'm rolling that fondant out pretty long, and I have this ribbon cutter. Whatever you put in between those two discs is how wide the ribbon is going to be. It needs to be about 1/4 inch wide, because that's how much of the cover is hanging over the edge of the cake. So I cut out 3 strips here, and then I am just taking my rulers and straightening them out so they dry straight. Now I got my cake out of the refrigerator. I have some piping gel and a tiny paintbrush, and I'm just getting a little bit of piping gel on the cake board and touching that bottom part of the white fondant so I can stick these pink pieces down for the bottom cover. So I'm cutting a straight edge off of the pieces that touch the inside of the top cover, and I'm just cutting it just so it's a little bit longer. I'm going to cut it down to size, and again I'm putting that down on the straight edge on the left side and then cutting it down on the right. And then I'm taking my rulers. This fondant is still a little soft, and I can really press this into the white fondant and make sure that pink strip is even with that top cover. And then I'm laying the last one across both of those strips that I made, and then cutting a corner seam and getting a little bit of piping gel underneath it to make sure that it is stuck down to the cake board. Doing the same thing for the other side. And now I want to take my ruler and again just press it in there to make sure that it is nice and straight. And that looks good. Let's put that back in the refrigerator. Now I printed this out the size that I wanted it to be. That's the same size as the top of the cake where I'm putting all of this. And then I cropped that and I just printed that part out on an edible sheet because it looks like it's cut out on the book. It doesn't look like it's fondant. It looks like it was cut out of a magazine. So I wanted to use edible images for this, and I'm just cutting all of those letters and also the lips out of those edible image sheets. And I do have a video showing you how I print and use edible images. I will link that in the description. And that looks good. I'm going to set that aside. Now I got my cake out of the refrigerator. I'm putting that on top, and this cake is really hard and cold, so I'm not going to mess it up. And I'm just making little marks of where I need to put these pieces. And then I have a little bit of piping gel. I turn those upside down on a paper towel. I'm just making sure the piping gel goes past the edge of there, so I get all of the edges and the edges aren't going to lift. So I am just placing these down onto this book cover in the same position that they are on the picture. So I just have the picture handy, and I'm just making sure that they are all on the right angle. And you don't want to use too much piping gel, just enough to make it stick. You don't want piping gel seeping out underneath. And now I have these edible markers. One tip is thicker and one tip is finer. And I find that the ink doesn't last too long in here, so I have some black edible printer ink. You can also use airbrush ink as well. And I'm getting a little bit in the cap. I'm going to dip the tip in there. And you want to make sure it's not too wet, so give it a little bit of time for that ink to absorb. And I just am holding that picture right in front of me, and I am freehanding this on here. And luckily it is like scribble, right? So it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just trying to look at the picture and make it look like the picture. And you don't see me doing it off camera, but I do keep dipping the tip of that marker in that black ink. And you want to make sure that your hand does not mess up the ink as you're writing on the cake. So I'm trying to work from left to right since I'm right-handed. That way I'm not going to mess it up. And it looks pretty much like the picture, and that looks good. So I want to put that back in the refrigerator and let that ink dry. Now I'm making this edible image birthday banner, and I have this little cutter, this paper cutter. I love this. I will link this in the description. I'm just making sure that I get straight edges on here, and I printed that out on my edible printer. And I rolled that pink fondant out really thin. I'm getting some piping gel all along the back, making sure I go over the edges so the edges will stick down, and then I'm curving it down there, making sure no air bubbles form behind it. And I'm taking a pizza cutter and just cutting even borders around the entire thing, and I'm letting it go a little bit longer. So I'm going to cut the little ribbon detail on either end, and I want to just curve it in so it covers that edge of the white part on both sides. And then I'm going to get a little bit of piping gel down where it's touching that white part, and then in the back of it as well. And then getting the cake out of the refrigerator, I can remove those wax paper pieces because it is holding its shape. Take a dry paintbrush and remove any excess cornstarch that's on the cake. And then I want to take a wet paper towel one more time and clean the cake board. And I just want to wave this on the front of the cake, and wherever it's touching the cake, I'm getting a little bit of piping gel behind it so it can stick down. And then I want to take a glue stick. I'm just getting a ribbon around this cake board. So I got a little bit of glue around the back of the ribbon as well, and I'm sticking that down and wrapping it around where it overlaps in the back and a little bit more glue down. And here is the burn book cake. Totally fetch. So there you go. How cool is this cake? And just a little note, this was a quarter sheet cake, and I put it on a 12-inch square board. Next time I'll probably put it on a 14-inch board just so I have a little bit more room for it. I started with it on an angle, and I kind of adjusted it so it was straighter on the board because the corners looked like they were too close to the edge. And this cake feeds about 20 to 25 people. And how much did I charge? This one was $325. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I do have a Cake Academy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. I would love to have you aboard. All of that information is in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials, and you can check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next, and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake, have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.